In this lesson, we'll learn similar techniques from our last lesson for creating a polar grid for a radar-style interface in our menu. Okay, so in our last lesson, you may have noticed that underneath that rectangular grid tool was a polar grid tool. So if I choose that, I can start to draw some really interesting shapes that kind of look like a radar that you might see for weather. So if I just start out by holding Shift and Alt to draw from the middle and draw a circle like this, I get a pretty basic looking shape. But it still looks really great. I love the way that the concentric and then these little straight lines kind of interplay with each other. But you have a lot of customization that you can create with these as well. So if I just delete this one and come over here and double click that tool, it's going to pop me open the polar grid tool options. And then I can come in here and really start to play around with the number of dividers I have. So maybe come in there, instead of a 5, I could put a 15, and that's going to give me 15 straight lines. The radial dividers are the straight lines. Then the concentric dividers, we had 5 earlier, maybe we'll have, let's just do 10 this time. So now we've got more straight lines than circles. So I'll go ahead and say OK to that. And then I'll just start to draw that circle. And you can see what this looks like. Now this almost looks like a spider web once you have this many little quadrants of dividers. So we probably want to keep that number a little bit lower. Now I like the lots of concentric lines. I think that that looks good. So let's maybe go ahead and try one more time here. And instead of having those radial dividers at 15, let's just turn that down to something maybe like a 7. And you want to be careful that you don't maybe accidentally grab one of those, because if you start moving these around, those lines are not going to be evenly distributed. So I'll just show you really quickly what that looks like. Pretty crazy. I mean, it's kind of interesting. Maybe you could find a use for that somewhere in your menu, but I want mine to be symmetrical. So I'm going to go ahead and double click that again. And if you accidentally do change that, you can just change them both back to 0. And that's going to give you the shape that you were trying to create all along. So that looks a little bit better, a little more interesting. And maybe we want the background of this to maybe be a solid color. So I could kind of come in here, maybe change this blue's transparency a little bit to be lighter. So maybe put that at a 50%. You could come in there, grab your align tool just to make sure that it's horizontally and vertically aligned, and that circle is actually all the way on the outside of that shape. So really easy to use that polar grid tool just to create something really quickly, and you can maybe scale this down. Now you do want to keep in mind that those strokes are going to scale in the same way that any other stroke would, so they're going to remain that thickness even if you make them smaller. So those are going to have a pretty decent stroke width on them if I scale this down too much more. So I'm just going to leave that right about there, just about that same size as the fan, and if we need to change it later, we can always go back in and adjust it. So in this lesson, we learned how to quickly make and customize the polar grid tool and use it to create that radar shape that we'll be using for the weather in our menu interface.